Rev up your engines! All right, a right-hand drive Jeep Cherokee. What on earth is going on here? This is a 95 Jeep Cherokee. It was born in Ohio. Then it was shipped to Japan. Then it was shipped to Michigan, where it was bought, and then sent to Massachusetts, where the buyers live. And that was 15 years ago. They bought it 15 years ago. Strange enough, the guy's mother owns it. As a postal worker, well, it only makes sense, right? They actually made these things for two reasons. They made it for postal vehicles, and they made it for export to England and Japan primarily. Now, they only sold a couple thousand of them the first year that they made them and sent them over, and that was a few years after Chrysler had bought AMC and got the Jeep name. This was long before Fiat took over the company and destroyed them. Now, as you can see when we open it up, it's no lie. That's the reason all the Japanese writing is here. And you can see it's kilometers. But strangely enough, the speedometer itself does miles per hour. Because if it only went 110 kilometers an hour, that'd mean it'd only do like 59 miles an hour. That's miles there. And as we look inside, it's kind of strange. There's no seat. The back's been taken out. Well, there's a reason for this. His mother does rural post office delivery, and they used to use this truck for it because they hated the truck that they had, and the post office paid her to use her own truck to deliver the mail. This has the 4-speed Aisin Toyota-made automatic transmission. They're pretty much bulletproof. Now, the later model Jeeps that had different transmissions, that's what always went out on them. Even with the 6-cylinder engines, the engine itself, those 6s, they can run forever. When you hook it up to a Toyota 4-speed automatic, that can run forever too. Now, it even came with air conditioning, which still works. Yes, they used to make things well at Jeep. Not so much anymore, especially since the Italians took over, and I have no hope for them at all now that the French have taken over the whole thing with Stellantis. But if you get in a time machine, hey, you should buy 4 or 5 of these. It lasts you a lifetime. Now, it's still relatively old school. It does have disc brakes in the front, but it's got drum brakes in the back, and of course there's going to be rust, being this old and living in Massachusetts, but that's more of a badge of honor. And back in the day, of course, this 4-liter, they call it high output. Their idea of high output is 180 horsepower. Not high, but back in the day, you know, these things do zip along. They don't have a particularly big high end, but they take off pretty fast. And of course, I can't help but laugh at it was built in Ohio, went to Japan, came back to Michigan, and ended up in Massachusetts. Bought it all those years ago, 10 grand. Well, they certainly get their money's worth. It's still going down the road. All right, let's see how much horsepower's left in this thing. On your mark, get set, go. Hey, it threw me back. Granted, there's no seat. I'm just sitting on a piece of plywood, but like I say, these things had some guts to them. No top end, but they take off pretty fast. Now, this thing did come from Japan, but unlike cars that customers of mine have imported from Japan that are Japanese models, never sold over here, where the exhausts are different, the fuel injections are different, sometimes the transmissions are different. This thing was made in Ohio. The parts are readily available for this thing. You go to AutoZone, Hilo, O'Reilly's, whatever, pick up a starter for it. It's not like you're not going to be able to find parts for these things. And of course, being a right-hand drive, if you're not a maniacal driver, it's not that big of a deal. But if you do a lot of high-speed passing, this is not the car for you. I've driven right-wheel drive cars, Virgin Islands, and the British Virgin Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is nuts. The U.S. Virgin Islands, they drive on the other side of the road, but it's U.S. territory. You figure that one out. If you're going to drive like a maniac, this is not the car for you. But since they built these for postal vehicles and for export to England and Japan, they were made this way. So they're perfectly made. It's not like some goofball conversion like some of these lunatic cars people bring me that were an automatic and then they put a standard in it and they didn't do it right and it shaked and it rattled. Or if they got a British car and then they switched it over to left-hand drive and it was never the same after this. This was built that way, so you don't care. You're not going to have problems because of that. This thing's been to Japan. It's been back. It's still really solid. Sure, there's superficial rust here and there. It's still working as a postal delivery vehicle in Massachusetts, and it still works perfectly fine. The ones that they buy at the post office, they're breaking down all the time. No, I just learned something. They wanted to get a white one because it's being used as a postal vehicle. But in Japan, I've just been informed, white is a sign of you're poor. They don't want to be driving around in white cars. Red they like, but white is a sign of being poor. So, just like when I was a kid in high school, if you had white socks, you were a nerd. Now today nobody cares, they all wear athletic socks. But when I was young, if you wore white socks, you were a nerd. And nobody wanted to have white socks. We all had black socks, blue socks. I guess in Japan they took it even further and said, you're poor. So, they got a red one because they never sold any white ones in Japan. Now, even on a highway with this high output 6 and all-wheel drive, he's only getting in the teens, and it's going to get even under that as a mail delivery stopping and going in the snow and all that stuff. But that's not the point of a Jeep. You don't get Jeeps for gas mods. You get them to be able to go places. And this thing has good high enough clearance, a solid Toyota-built transmission. Remember that, people. Toyota built the transmission for this particular one. And they haven't had any problems with it at all in the running gear of the engine. And like I said, even the AC still works. It kind of shocks me. I've seen Chrysler's that were 9 months old that the AC stopped working on them these days. Not these old ones, though. So it's time to say sayonara to this Japanese Jeep, even though it was made in Ohio, which now resides in Massachusetts. And if you live in certain areas, it's actually delivering your mail today. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Cayman 987 says, with used car prices so high, do you think you should just hold off a year to buy one? Oh, I agree with that one entirely. I'm kind of that way here. I'm thinking about buying property here in Rhode Island. I really like it, right? They've gone bananas. They think that a 780 square foot cabin on the ocean is worth $1.1 million. So I may wait 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Who knows how many years I can wait? They've lost their minds. Same thing with cars now. My son's looking for a used Toyota Sienna. He wants an all-wheel drive, and he showed me one. They wanted $31,400 for a 5-year-old Sienna. You can get a new one for that price. People have lost their minds entirely. They've really lost it. And my advice is, hold off on buying any kind of car for a while, unless, you know, a relative dies or somebody joins the army, you can get a fantastic deal. Hold off. Don't fall into the greed pit. Scotty, how do you prevent oil dilution on my 2019 Honda Civic with this 1.5 Earth Dream engine? Well, put oil in the car. If your engine has the delusion that it is oil and it doesn't, it won't work. What you want to do is change your oil every 5,000 miles with full synthetic oil and use that new oil. Brand new one that they designed last year just for those engines, the Deere W16 oil that they made for those. Change it every 5,000 miles. And if you live in a cold climate, warm your car up maybe 4 or 5 minutes before you drive and take it on longer trips whenever possible. And that'll help it the most. Adam Lally says, I got an 09 Dodge Journey. I'm throwing a PO172 and PO175. My mechanic says I need to replace my catalytic converters on bank 1 and 2. Your thoughts, please. Thank you. It says you have inefficient catalytic converters. Yes. The problem is there's a dozen different things that can cause that. Unless he's a really good mechanic and he analyzed it perfectly, he's just guessing. He's guessing with your money. I've seen many people, oh, they get the CAT code. They buy a CAT, the code comes right back. Generally, catalytic converters go wrong because something else is wrong. If your car runs too rich or too lean, it will ruin the catalytic converters. You put new catalytic converters on, sometimes within a year, you'll get that code right back because you didn't fix the underlying problem. If I were you, I'd get an opinion from another mechanic first and see what they say and tell them what I just said. Say, well, Scotty says, you know, it isn't always the cats. And an honest guy's going to say, yeah, it can be all these different things. Let us check them all first. Ian Thorne says, Scotty, would you ever own a carbureted car, or is it too much of a hassle? Well, carburetors work perfectly fine for their day. The problem is they don't meet the anti-pollution specifications of modern cars. So in the United States, they can't make new cars with carburetors. They have to come with fuel injections to pass the emission standards. That said, I had a Toyota Corolla SR5 for 30 years that was carbureted, and I never had to work on a carburetor, and it ran perfectly fine. Plus, they're cheaper to repair. Like my grandson, he likes Camaros turbos and stuff. And he gets the older ones that have 4-barrel carburetors on them. And I mean, you can get a real good 4-barrel Edelbrock for a couple $100 if you price around. A whole fuel injection system or car costs thousands. That's what the carburetor does, the same thing. So, no, I wouldn't have any questions about getting one. My Toyotas are fuel injected. They don't break now, so I leave them alone. But I wouldn't have any qualms if I wanted to buy one. Cheap enough, get a good price. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.